Hello, friends. We are continuing now with our treatise on white magic video commentaries, and this is our 31st program. The 31st program within the rules for magic on the astral plane. We're in Rule 10, and we've done or about to do 16 programs in that Rule 10. It's quite a long rule. And we've been talking about the power of the atom coming. We've been talking about the effectiveness of color and sound, both of which will be important therapeutics and developmental processes in the Aquarian age. Brotherhood will be the keynote and a demonstrated fact in nature. Well, perhaps by the time some of the Mercurian decanate occurs, because Mercury rules Gemini. Gemini is the sign of brotherhood. But Venus also has much to do with loving brotherhood, and Libra and Venus with right human relations. Maybe during the difficult first 720 years when Saturn generally rules, we will not yet have that. And I think, we will come to terms with what water is, Saturn in Aquarius, and what the waters of life may be. Okay. Now, here we go. We're continuing. It was a long program last time. It won't be as long this time. It will be an age wherein men will walk in the light, for it will be a world of recognized inner radiance. We're told that as initiation becomes possible on the outer plane, men will be more naturally clairvoyant and will see the inner light radiating from people and know that they are ready for the initiatory process. So a world of recognized inner radiance wherein the work of the world will be carried forward through the medium of sound and eventually through the use of words of power and the work of the trained magician. Well, pretty much we're dealing with human hands and human feet right now, and not yet with the more occult powers of sound, but this is what Master DK predicts. These trained workers in substance, we might say, in the type of energy which underlies the dense outer world, and even, the ethers are substantial to the dense outer world. These trained workers in substance, understanding the nature of matter a lot more than we do now, really, seeing always in terms of light and comprehending the purpose of sound. How does it go? Vibration, sound, vibration, light, sound, color. That's one of the sequences, and the other sequence begins with sound and then moves to light. So these trained workers in substance, understanding the nature of matter, seeing always in terms of light and comprehending the purpose of sound, will bring about those structural changes and those material transformations which will establish a civilization adequate for the work of the coming race. And this means also changes in the physical and etheric body of man, which will be greatly elevated in quality, resilience, strength, and there will be a lot more ability to resist, radiatorily resist disease and the various miasmas which find their way presently into the etheric body. Also, I think the emotions will be more controlled and purified, and that will also prevent the descent of disease-causing impulses into the etheric body, and thence into the physical body. Those cultural methods also which will take the the work will be that of the conscious unification of the soul and its vehicle of manifestation, the very thing towards which we presently struggle as aspirants and disciples, and it will be more generalized then on a cultural basis. I think in the Agni Yoga book somewhere, we're given a definition of culture as the cult or the cultivation of of light, cult the cultivation of the light. Culture is a deeper and more fundamental source of change than is civilization, which is more the result of how culture works upon the many. It trickles down, and then many receive the fruits of culture. These cultural methods also, which will take the undeveloped of the race and carry them forward to a better manifestation, and a truer expression of themselves will be established. And this is the privilege of the coming generation of scientific investigators to bring about, and we're pretty sure now, when we read this, we are quite sure that the word generation does not simply mean a 25-year period, approximately, in which a new group of human beings is produced. It's something more than that. It has something to do with that which motivates different groups of human beings and makes changes because they are part of a new capacity to receive a higher vibration. We're pretty far right now. The coming generation of scientific investigators is nowhere near the raising of the undeveloped. Although, well, when we look at the changes in the communication system, certainly education is more widely available because of the internet. And maybe this is part of it, this raising and carrying them to a better manifestation. But we're still a ways off because he's talking about scientific investigations, presumably into the nature of man and the best methods of education and so forth. The outstanding characteristic, however, of the coming cycle, and perhaps this means the Aquarian cycle, I would think, and it's a fairly long time, and then, even longer when we consider the great age of Aquarius, which is impending, will be an outgrowth of psychology. Interestingly enough, the higher method of teaching truth on the fifth ray is esoteric psychology, and the fifth ray is brought forward in strength through the constellation and its attendant sign, so to speak, the constellation Aquarius. Okay, fifth ray in Aquarius and esoteric psychology. So esoteric, yes, psychology, Aquarius, and the fifth ray which Aquarius transmits. So, we think, well, psychology probably takes in all the different rays. Ray 2 is very important in it, ray 4 as well, and there is a master who is deeply involved with esoteric psychology now, and I think maybe this is a master on the fourth ray by the name of Polydorus, a certain Master P. Polydorus is Uranus and is a member of the Brotherhood of Luxor. But, when we talk about all the adaptations and harmonizations and the kind of skill in action that is needed, generated by the new psychology, we can see that the fourth ray would be very useful. I don't like that APPRX. Maybe I can make it APPRX approximately. Perhaps that will do it. Okay. All right. It will be the emergence of a new factor from the standpoint of the modern psychologist as DK goes into this, explaining the kind of cul-de-sac into which modern psychology has wandered. Maybe the depth psychology of Jung is somewhat immune from that criticism, but there is a very materialistic approach to psychology, and it just simply deals with the response of the form and not with motivating factors. I mean, anything that, any system of thought that considers the psychological life as some kind of extrusion of the material life is, got the tail wagging the dog. Everything is backwards. It is the psyche that produces the form and not the form that produces the psyche, though the condition of the form may influence the way the psyche expresses. So it will be the emergence of a new factor from the standpoint of the modern psychologist of the materialistic school and will involve the recognition of the soul. We're a long way from that. We have now seventh ray, seventh ray psychology under the influence of such psychologists as Skinner, conditioned response psychology is useful in training, but a long way from the truth of the subtle mechanism of man and of the true psyche or soul. So, I was always interested in psychology as a young person. And then I, got into some of the classes that were being taught at the University of Michigan and other places. They were so shallow and dealt with such externals. Many people, I think, who are deeply interested in the truer psychology get turned off by the way it's taught. But then if they read Master DK, all of this changed for me in 1971 when I visited the Adyar library there in Wheaton, Illinois, and those psychology books, almost too high on the shelf to reach, as I've mentioned before, kind of fell off and hit me. I said, I think I'll take these home with me for a while. And that was the psychology that I was truly looking for. But it's in advance of where things are right now, unfortunately. Well, but, predictably, it's in advance. What can you do? Let's just see here, 1859. Yeah, we're good. All right. So let's just go on making our way through this excellent book. The mechanistic school of psychologists has served and is serving an invaluable purpose. I mean, because we know, so we will know as a result, how the form responds to the inner principles, and the findings of the behaviorists, that's where B.F. Skinner comes in, I think, are sound, in fact, though erroneous in conclusion, not rightly estimating what man truly is interiorly. There really is no interiority for these kinds of psychologists. They are basically materialists. And I'm remembering, if true, I think in Agni Yoga, Plato is called the thinker, and I think it's Freud that is called the materialist. I guess he didn't want to name names, and the Buddha is called the lion, which is interesting. I don't know if he had that sign in his chart. I have a feeling it was mostly Taurus and Pisces, but nevertheless, Master M calls him the lion. Okay, they serve as a needed break upon the more speculative and mystical school, which is dignified by the name introspectionist. Well, there was a time when the academics and scholastics ruled the realm of knowledge, and along came Master R, and he said, look, let's put all this to the test. He was a triple Aquarius kind of, Sun in Aquarius, Aquarius rising, Mercury rising in Aquarius. He had load of fifth ray in that incarnation, and he started what turned out eventually to be the scientific revolution, which was in contradistinction to scholasticism and philosophical reasoning, which was unproven, unfounded. So he says, let's prove these things. And I suppose the introspectionist approach, though introspection is valuable, also came up with much that needed to be corroborated. Behaviorists, right? I never have been partial to this type of psychology, but I do see that, excuse me, that it does assist in grounding our knowledge in verifiable fact. Like much else in the world at this time, from two great lines of thought, such as the mechanistic and the introspective, or subjective mentioned above, a third will manifest which will embody the truth of both positions and duly adjust them to each other. So a noble middle path will be found in psychology, and DK gives us much about the mechanism, indeed much, and it is of great value. We're not totally idealists in the way that Bishop Berkeley was. Maybe we're even more radical in some ways. And we're not totally mechanists, and they might call themselves realists, the way some of the more materialistic, matter-oriented psychologists are. All of it's necessary. We have to have all of it and not just emphasize one thing only over another. On a larger scale, this is working out in the fusing of Occident and Orient, of mysticism and occultism. Mysticism is very subjective. It has more to do with the 246 line, and occultism deals with also the behavior of the form, 1357. And it's so interesting that it is the first ray ashram that basically has to somehow build and sustain the outer form, which will hold the inner principles. We have no quarrel with either, he says, but in the evolution of thought, the main trends of ideas at this time are rapidly approaching each other, and from them a synthesis will emerge and will prove an adequate platform upon which the coming cycle may make it stand, and probably PRBL, the avatar of synthesis will be influential into this synthesis. All kinds of things are coming together, and a more completed picture is necessary and emerging. Like the many sects in Christianity, we can emphasize only one thing and miss something else equally important or more important. Whether, as I mentioned the other day, whether you when you're baptizing someone, you have to have them hold their nose and dunk them in the river, or whether you can do it simply with water from a much smaller source. These things are held to be paramount, and they are really very concrete uh, approaches and probably have little to do with the inner type of consciousness which we must have if we are to be true Christians in the sense that Christ would have us be. It might be of value if we noted the tendency of the three lines of thought, roughly speaking, in the field of psychology. So you see how this too is a seminal book. Certain things are laid out, which are taken up in other books and further developed. So obviously the Tibetan had a huge and detailed plan of what he could cover. And of course, he and they had to sustain Alice Bailey for the full 30 years so that the anticipated work could be done. Well, what are the different methods of psychology? You know, one here, we'll try to be as clear as we can be, the mechanistic, laying the emphasis upon structure, ascribing the reactions of the human organism, mental, emotional, physical, entirely to the material aspect, and this is a great error. But I talk with so many people, you know, who cannot conceive that the subtle can produce the gross, the precipitation of that which is subtle producing that which is denser. They just can't conceive it because our mind has been trained an entirely different way. I mean, anything that arises in an intangible manner seems to arise from that which we credit as being real. And these are all the material things in front of us. So, ascribing these reactions entirely to the material aspect and regarding the structure as responsible for and giving rise to all lines of conduct characteristics which man displays, both abnormal and normal. Again, I'm looking for that word, yes, the psyche. In this method of thought is considered, if I'm correct here, an epiphenomenon of matter, some kind of extrusion, as I said, you know, some kind of, I don't know, matter has produced it. Matter has produced the subtle instead of the other way around. Now, we really do need, and it's coming, and, you know, it came also with the atomic bomb and other atomic developments. We do need an etherealization of thought, a dematerialization of thought. Then we have, roughly speaking, in the field of psychology, the introspective school. Maybe a lot of us, without being able to name that particularly, are more inclined in that direction. You're not so often, perhaps, having the hard-headed scientists reading Master Decay, unless perhaps it's later a treatise on cosmic fire, and then for people magically inclined, when other pieces of information are given, then perhaps we will have the practical magicians of the coming age reading a treatise on white magic and whatever else may be given. I mean, when I stop to think of it, you know, I look forward with great anticipation to what may be offered by Master DK in the third installment, and I'd surely like to help, you know. The introspective school positing a self or a conscious something which is responsible for conditions and which, as has sometimes been said, is aware of awareness. And here, you know, here we have Carl Jung. He does talk about the self as an integrating center, and he has people draw the process of their ongoing integration, and this kind of controlling, integrating, observing center shows up, and he thinks of it as the self in control, if I have my understanding correct here. I was once a student of Carl Jung. I think I just read through everything he had and just about killed myself doing it one fine winter back many years ago, more than 50 years ago. And then I discovered occult psychology, which went even further. And you know that Jung was no particular friend of the Theosophists. He kind of almost bitterly said, well, they think they know everything. They think they know where everything comes from. And he was an old alchemist and brilliant scholar and examiner of the psyche on a very experiential basis. But he didn't think that the Theosophists had the answer. This school of psychologists recognizes the structure but goes further and regards certain aspects of conduct and certain reactions and problems as insoluble under the pure mechanistic process. They approach more nearly the occult position, but do not go so far. And as I said, you know, Jung, in many ways, was a fine occultist, probably in his own way of carrying on his inner psychic life. He was more of an occultist than many of us. But okay, he never externally gave credit for the occult theosophical mode of approach. Then, okay, then there might be called what I call the vitalists, or that group. Interesting Master DK's classifications here. The vitalists are that group of psychologists who, admitting the fact of the structure, and even in esoteric healing, you just have to admit the fact of the structure and study it so you don't do something entirely stupid in relation to the structure while you're, operating with somewhat simplified occult methods. That group of psychologists who, admitting the fact of the structure, yet regard it as subjected to the influences of energies and forces emanating from the outer environment. Okay, this is what, let's just say, this is what the vitalists do. Now, there are many more approaches, of course. Vitalists, and we'll add it to the dictionary. I'm sorry. These are the energies of the wider nature than those arising entirely within a man's own self, and a number among them the great basic urges for which nature itself is responsible, and which can be seen and felt in units of organic life other than the human. So this is let's just call it a broad picture involving large external causes. This is a little different, perhaps, I don't know, than the blending of the mechanistic and introspectionist approaches. The truth which is safeguarded in all these schools is one truth, and each aspect is correlated. I suppose it's going to be the occult approach, which deals with true causes. There is a mechanism through which the real man functions, and there is a structure which he has built up in conformity to the laws of nature and which he can learn to use and control. Yes, there is. So, what do we say? That's no good. Same thing. Always we must take the mechanism into consideration, but in accordance with the more subjective and speculative school, we must learn to differentiate. He must learn to differentiate between himself as the conscious center of awareness, which I suppose is independent of matter, the eye upon the throne of intelligence. I remember the work of Yogi Ramacharaka from the Chicago School of Yoga, very good books. The eye, helping us find the eye. And he said, well, if you don't find it now, you will in a couple of future lives. How much encouragement was that? The eye upon the throne of intelligence and the apparatus through which he can contact the outer world. So what do we have here? A keen discrimination between subject and object. When the I, the user of the mechanism, which, is not even, as I say, it's just considered to be not real by the mechanist. It's an epiphenomenon. It's an extrusion. It's some kind of secretion? I don't know. When the I, the user of the mechanism, can do this, he becomes aware of another fact. And that is that not only is he a generator and user of energy and the director of a quota of vitality, the etheric body, which is his own, but it wouldn't be called the etheric body in non-occult terms, but that there are energies and forces in nature and the planet and also extraplanetary or cosmic to which he can also respond and to which he can learn to use and adapt. So, this paragraph that we've just been given, so this shows the synthesis of all three, and the vitalistic position accounts, if extended, for the many subtle energies with which we are surrounded. Okay, the three present schools are therefore in embryo custodians of these three factors, the outer mechanism, the inner controlling I, and the great impelling environment bestowing upon us energies, many of which are very subtle, or at least it will be discovered to be so, and not just outer impacts. The three present schools are therefore in embryo custodians of these three factors. Under the present system of quarrel and separation, a problem also with the fifth ray, really, these three schools are occupied largely with disproving each other's theories. Well, and that's a bit like students of occultism criticizing each other's points of view. I think the idea is to see where these points of view may lead. Of course, when people are being seriously misled, well, do you do something about it or not? Do you offer your opinion or not? It depends on who you're talking to, I think. Sometimes a well-placed word can correct an errant tendency. But as always, we have to make that judgment on the basis of who the individual to whom we may be speaking. Okay, vitalistic, I want to make that yeah. But they are all three of them correct in their facts, though wrong in their deductions. Because the true picture of the constitution of man just is not yet existing in the public mind. They all three need each other, and from a blending of the three presentations there will emerge a fourth, which will be nearer the truth than any of the separated three. And of course, that fourth, like the point in the triangle in a way, it's what we think that the occult approach will offer this fourth way. And even now we have something, well, I don't know if I should mix this with the different forces of psychology, but we have something called fourth psychology, fourth force, the psychology of self-actualization, the Maslow approach and the humanistic psychologists and so forth. And then now with Master DK's esoteric psychology, we have at least what I call the fifth force, dependent very much on the fifth ray, which, as I said, is the mode of teaching, the higher mode of teaching psychology, or a higher mode of teaching on the fifth ray, and it's esoteric psychology. I wonder if I could I possibly just take a little venture here and go to esoteric psychology 1 and esoteric psychology teaching. Let's just see if I, no. Okay, let's just see. There's another way to get at this, and we'll call it like this. We'll call it city planning. At least I remember there was something there. Yeah, there it is. Well, here it is. The higher expression, the science of the soul, Ray-Fi, esoteric psychology. See how city planning helped me get there? That's a fourth ray approach. And then the modern educational systems, which are still very much training the concrete mind, except perhaps in some philosophy courses. Okay, when we come to the consideration of the basic trends in the world of current thought, it becomes apparent that one of the most dominant, remember, this is 90 years ago, or 85, or whatever. One of the most dominant is the increasing emphasis laid upon group consciousness or environmental awareness. It's not just the isolated individual. And we do have, all of these groups that have been formed to help each other. It's an Aquarian trend. I'm thinking about Alcoholics Anonymous and all of these 12-step programs. I'm thinking about the various encounter groups for people who are variously addicted or have some problem, which they all share in common and are seeking clarification in group form. So anyway, the trends is the emphasis upon group consciousness, and Aquarius is a major group sign, the creativity of the group, as opposed to, let's say, Leo, the creativity of the individual. This has been recognized by the man of the street, the average human being of the time, and his average thought process, as a sense of responsibility, and indicates in the individual an egoic vibration. Now, what's interesting about this is that DK elsewhere has told us that it is the sense of responsibility, which is really, I think he even said, the first sign that the egoic vibration or the soul influence is really beginning to have an impact. The sense of responsibility is not just a feel-good thing. When responsibility touches you and it maybe impels a kind of sacrifice, you have to give up what you might personally prefer to do for what is more necessary, then we know the soul is in action, as long as it's not some kind of morbid, the Christian conscience, the morbid Christian conscience, where man is born in sin and no good thing can come out of any of us, and anything we might enjoy is bad. We have to keep the balance there in assessing what is a right sense of responsibility and what is an excessive morbid sense of responsibility plus self-condemnation. It is one of the first signs that the soul is beginning to use its mechanism. Okay, well, I guess, I get to elaborate on things that DK just says quickly, succinctly, and probably that's where I got it from in the first place. No longer does the man live in the interests of the separated self, but he begins to realize the need for adjustments to and in the condition of his neighbor. We might call this can be called the beginning of love thy neighbor as thyself, because after all, he is. That's the thing that's left out of that. It's implied love thy neighbor as you love yourself, assuming that everybody has a pretty healthy self-love. But the identificatory factor there, love thy neighbor as thyself because he is thyself, that is another step, and it increases in realization as the higher initiations are taken. He assumes the duty of being, in a very real sense, his brother's keeper. What did Cain say? Am I my brother's keeper? Well, he killed off Abel. Well, Vulcan kills off Mars in a way, and will kills off desire. So there are some good aspects to it. I don't think we would like to live in a world in which Cain had not killed Abel, but we've made out of it a moral moment of unbrotherliness. And, Vulcan was always a bit of an enemy of Mars because Mars was having an affair with Vulcan's wife, Venus. Well, all of these affairs and liaisons just have to do with magnetic interaction on the level of the gods. So he assumes the duty of being, in a very real sense, his brother's keeper, and realizes that in reality, progress, contentment, peace of mind, and prosperity do not exist for him apart from that of his brother. What an interesting thing, given the present political scene where, we strive to get rich in materialistic terms at the expense of someone that we don't even recognize as our brother. It's a dog-eat-dog world, and social Darwinism prevails, and only the fittest survive. So step on your brother's face as you are climbing the mountain of ambition. Okay, nevertheless, we do realize DK's view of this and the view of the entire hierarchy is yes, we have to be someone who is for others, and Christ is the great example of the man for others. I told you about the convent up there in Tromsø, Norway, where it's a totus tuus, totally for you, something entirely for you, if I'm translating that Latin properly. We are entirely for you, though we are ones for others. Now, when you begin to realize that the other is not separate from yourself, it takes on a very interesting dynamic. This realization is steadily expanding from the individual to the state and nation, from the family unit to the world, and hence the big organizations, fraternities, clubs, leagues, and movements which have for their objective the uplift and welfare of men everywhere. Not long after this came that 1936 sort of crescendo when a very strong impulse of love was hoped to be used to get man on the right track. It was one of those years when cycles came together, and a great flood of goodwill was released, but not enough. The lords of form are tough customers, and we have the ability within ourselves to respond to their criminal intentions, and we haven't cleared ourselves of those tendencies which, under their impulse and our own complicity, take us down. The necessity of giving instead of getting, we used to have in the University of Seven Rays qualities of cultivation, qualities of contribution. That's the giving part. The necessity of giving instead of getting is growing in the racial consciousness and the recognition of certain of the basic concepts connected with brotherhood. is steadily growing, maybe not all. The man who gives all for his brother, greater love hath no man than that he lay down his life for a friend. That is a long way. And the great story from the ancient days is the story of Damon and Pythias, and you may know that one. And I forget who it was that, anyway, one of these fast friends was condemned to death by a tyrant. But he asked, can he not see his parents and say goodbye? And the tyrant refused, but his friend said, I will be in your place, and I know you will return, and if you do not return, I will give my life for you, because you are so much my friend. And so the tyrant cynically agreed to this, thinking that all people thought as he did, and that the released friend would never return. But in fact, the man who went to see his parents rushed, saw them, bid them farewell, and rushed back, and was delayed and delayed. And he entered the scene desperately as his friend was about to be executed. I get tears in my eyes when I think of it. About to be executed. And he said, oh, my friend, I so feared that I would be too late. And he put himself down and took the friend's place. Well, even tyrants have a heart. And this particular tyrant was so shocked and so moved by this gesture of brotherliness, even though the life was involved. A man not operating selfishly and cynically, but rushed back to save his friend, that he pardoned them both. He let them both go, and I'm sure it changed their lives. I don't know, I can't think, was the city Syracuse involved in that? I think all we have to do is look it up on the internet, and I'll get it, correct, sort of. But that's one of my favorite stories. My mother read that to me, and I just was so affected by it. Somehow I've never forgot it. Damon and Pythias. There it is. Damon and Pythias. And I guess there are stories. It's a legend illustrating the Pythagorean ideal of friendship. Pythias is accused of and charged with plotting against the tyrannical Dionysius of Syracuse. And it is Pythias who runs to see his parents, and Damon who offers his life, kind of a lieutenant taking his place. And the Greek Dionysus puts the friendship of the two men to a life or death test. And, that's an amazing thing. It might be great to look at some of this. Some of this is quite old, but it's a great, great story, isn't it? And it just shows you, that here's people before the time of Christ operating in a totally what we might call Christian manner. Greater love hath no man than that he lay down his life for his friend. So these are some of the fundamentals of brotherhood, and actually maybe one of the final tests of brotherhood. Brotherhood as a fact in nature is as yet largely a theory, but brotherhood as an ideal is now fashioned in the racial consciousness. Now, how is it that it is a fact in nature? And what is the basis of that? The fact that brotherhood is a fact in nature, and brotherhood is based upon monadic, monadic identification, or monadic sameness. Maybe that's not the best word, but we are each other, and it's one thing to love another, And that's a great thing. And, we give a lot of lip service to that. And it's another thing to be that other that one loves. That's another step, wouldn't you agree? And we have to get that feeling, that realization, that identification that whoever we look at, whatever we see, even inanimate things, supposedly inanimate, we are those things. And you almost have to sit with your consciousness for a while until it appears. The realization that subject and object are the same. I'm a long way from being able to do this necessarily at will, but if I wait long enough and concentrate in the right way at the right point of tension, there are times when the realization comes. So I know I'm cultivating the right attitude, which will lead to isolated unity, maybe not as quickly as I would like, but on the way to realizing that all things are externalizations of being, and being is the great fact, and that which is so simple and so immediate that it's difficult to isolate. You see, isolated unity is in a way the isolation of being. I could call it isness because sometimes anyway, because isness somehow creates in me the vibration of realization. I just realize that whatever I perceive is, it doesn't have to be material, it can be immaterial, whatever. It's real. Even if it's an illusion, it's real. It's a real illusion. It has isness, even our great illusions and glamours have isness. So I would recommend the cultivation of the realization of isness and the identification of all things in that isness. One of the two great schools of thought or trends of ideas which is destined to pass away is that of the current philosophies as we now know them. Oh, I wonder, I don't think this would make the philosophers in the schools too happy. Even when I read it, I'm not too happy because I'm philosophically inclined. Philosophy in its technical sense as the love of wisdom will increase. Maybe, just playing the games with words and being hyper analytical in the realm of words. Maybe those are the kinds of things that will pass away as we move into the higher mind and into the transcendental mind of Buddhi, into the abstract mind. Philosophy in its technical sense as a love of wisdom will increase as men understand increasingly the meaning of wisdom and become epocally wiser, finally, at last, more wise, more pursuing, cultivating wisdom than they have in the past. It's almost like, when I went to music school, uh, my love of music was not satisfied because it got so extremely technical that the beauty of music was forgotten and we had to listen to all kinds of awful stuff based simply on some intellectual formulations without heart. That's why I always appreciate working with my comrade in arms here, Harold Moses, because we both have that love of harmony and not simply of, uh, the 12-tone rose and other intellectual formulations. Well, in the same way, you love wisdom and you go into become a philosophy major and you discover that it's so busy constructing, deconstructing, splitting hairs, working in the realm of mere words that your love of wisdom is stifled. The university can be a great disappointment to many people who have some heart in what they love. But increasingly, it won't be so. And, when we create a school like the Morya Federation or, the Tibetans inspiring the Arking School or the School for Esoteric Studies or the other occult schools, they have more. They have wisdom, real wisdom, and they cultivate wisdom along with technical knowledge, and they don't get lost in incredible hair splitting based upon unrealities. Anyway, but the present schools of philosophy have nearly served their purpose. Well, 80 years have gone. What is that nearly? What is that nearly? I wonder. A friend of mine once wisely, he knew I was culturally inclined, and I said, well, I think I should be a philosophy major. And he says, no, I don't think so. Because he taught philosophy. He taught philosophy. And he knew how much it was all wrapped up only in the mind and not in the soul, not in the heart, not in wisdom. This has been the formulation of ideas concerning God and his relationship to man, concerning divinity, eschatology, and spiritual relationships. And let's look up that word, because I'm always forgetting, sort of what it means. Goodbye, Damon and Pythias, eschatology, and maybe we have the part of theology concerned with death, the judgment, and the final destiny of the soul and of humankind. Christian hope is concerned with eschatology, or the science of last things. Okay, so let's put that in, because I think it's important, important somehow. Yeah, okay, eschatology. Anyway, we can intellectualize these things till the cows come home, but the real experience is something different and something far deeper. And now, we're entering the age of experience and the age of knowledge, real knowledge, and we're leaving behind this period of mere speculation and intellectual formulation. The last great gestures of the philosophical schools yet remain to be done, to be made. So there's hope. Their place will be taken in later centuries by those who will indeed and in truth be cosmologists. For once the word of mankind is understood, and we might almost call that, the soul of humanity. Once the word of mankind is understood and grasped, and the significance of the individual appreciated, the word of the cosmos will receive due and more correct attention, and the laws and nature of that great being in whom we live and move and have our being will be studied. The cosmic Christ can never be known by any except the individual Christ. So, unless we have the Christ consciousness, we cannot know anything of the consciousness of the cosmic Christ. So, we are interested in esoteric philosophy, but that takes into consideration many hypotheses, suppositions, which the normal schools of philosophy will say, no, we can't accept that. It's not proven. We cannot reason on the basis of these unproven factors. So, man, as we shall see as we proceed, right. I think that this might be enough. I have this feeling there's so much going on here tonight, different programs and so forth. This is page 339, and I have that feeling that it would be better to, even though we've just done a few pages, to call it at this point, although I am tempted to go on. I like those 3, 4, and one day I did even a 5-hour program. Must have been a horrible thing when transcribers found it. All right, so anyway, we're just about at the end here, so let's just say this is the end of number 32, and this is the end of number 16, and it's 336 to 339, and it is the 24th, and we'll get rid of that 322. And we'll go on to number 33, and it's going to be the 17th program in this Rule 10, and it'll be 336 until it'll be 339. So this will be 339, and this will be 339 to wherever we go. All right, friends, I do hate to discontinue, truly. I would like to go on, but we're learning about the future, the present and the future in this big section, and we're learning about the potentials that are held ahead for developing humanity in the Aquarian age, and we're now building the foundation for humanity in the future and for our future incarnations, which will work in cooperation with the great spiritual hierarchy. That's what we're doing. And I hope we develop that continuity of consciousness that shows us where we have been, probably, within the causal body. If we get that far, some people come right back and never quite get into the causal body, but nor should they necessarily at that point. We may be able to see a few lives behind and maybe a few lives ahead if the solar angel will share with us what it sees, because it certainly sees that much and maybe a whole lot more. So let's call it, and we'll go on to number 33 when we can. Could even be tonight, I don't know. But at least at the moment we have something going. And I'll get this to you as soon as possible. These will appear on YouTube under Moria Federation Esoteric Education, ATOMVC, a treatise on white magic video commentary. That's how I sometimes put them down, ATOWMVC. Abbreviation, as they don't let you have too long a title. Okay, thank you, and let's proceed. Learning, study hard, assimilate, and apply. I talk to myself as I talk to you. Bye-bye.